And let's take it up from here quickly. Let's work on how to do a thesis into a paper and how to do it quickly. Let me introduce my other panelist on the session today, and that's Dr. Latika Gupta. She is a professor in immunology at Sanjay Gandhi Institute of Postgraduate Studies at Lucknow. And Latika, would you like to quickly introduce yourself so that we can go forward from here?
Hello, everyone. As Dr. Goyal said, I am working as assistant professor at SGPJ Lucknow, and I'm a rheumatologist. And apart from that, I also enjoy teaching and research. So here we are today.
This is a brief overview of what we will be talking about today. We will talk about why we need to do a conversion of a thesis to a paper. We'll talk about when is the best time to do this. We'll address how we can do this. We'll give you an indicative word limit. We will give you a sequence of how you should be writing. We will discuss some common pitfalls, which includes authorship, among others. And we will do some tips and tricks which will help you in developing your paper from your thesis.
So this brings us to the question. We've already done a thesis, and so why do we want to do more work? For most of us, the intent is to sail through MD or MS uneventfully and peacefully, while for some, it is learning the art of science, while others want to contribute more meaningfully to the world of science. For some mental wanderers, it is the quest of the unknown. And for some academically driven people, this is a metric for success.
Let me add to that. Why do you need to convert your thesis to a paper? Ab to MD ho gaya, kar liya, thesis bhi submit kar diya. Why the hell should I work on it more and convert it into a paper? Let me tell you, jo thesis aap karte ho, jo thesis aap banate ho, it will go only to the laboratory racks, the library racks. It may rest in the rack or the book rack or the bookcase in your thesis guide supervisor's room. It will also rest in a bookcase or in an almirah in your house, but nobody else will read it. From there, it's not going anywhere. इससे ज़्यादा उसको कोई नहीं पढ़ने वाला है. So if you really want something to come out of the work that you have put in, the hard work that you have done, then you really need to sit for another couple of hours. शायद 2 या 3 घंटे से ज़्यादा आपको नहीं लगेंगे at this stage when you have already completed your thesis. And that is the best time. That thesis complete abhi hui hai, abhi submit kariye. Just spend a couple of hours more and convert that thesis into a quick paper. It will not take you more than 2, 3, 4 hours. After you have burnt the midnight oil for so many days to do this thesis in the last week or so, this is the best time to finish this. So this is a general sequence that you write and an indicative word limit which will help you to develop your paper when you start writing it. So a good paper or an average paper would have about 2,500 to 3,500 words. So an indicative good size of a paper is about 3,000 words. It can be longer, it can be shorter, but 3,000 is a good size paper and gets acceptability immediately when you submit it. The order of writing, which I usually promote and advise on writing, is first you do the conclusions, then the methods, then the observations and results, followed by the introduction, then the discussion, and finally the abstract, title, and keywords. Now, this is a little unusual than what you would find at other places, and this is very different from what you read in your paper. When you read a paper, you read introduction first, you read maybe an abstract even before you read the introduction, and then you read the methods, the discussion, and the conclusions in that sequence. However, when you have written your thesis and completed your research work already, तो methods लिखना काफी आसान हो जाता है. And methods is practically what you have already written in your thesis. So it's good to start with the methods. Conclusion even before the methods, because we will see in the next slide. So a good size conclusion is usually between 100 to 200 words. And this poll asks you a simple question. How much do you remember from the last paper that you have read? The poll is open on your screens now, and we close the poll now, and I share the results with you. So most of you remember only the general message that was conveyed. So an important question, if you're only going to remember one message from the paper that you have read, do you really have that one message? And if you do not have that message, then please don't write that paper. You should not write that paper till you know that message. जब आपको वो message पता चल जाए, then the best thing to do is write that message in one single clear sentence and paste it on a wall right in front of you. Because this is the message that is going to stay with you as you write this paper. जब आप इंट्रोडक्शन लिखो तो भी इस मैसेज को ध्यान रखो, जब आप मेथड्स लिखो तब भी इस मैसेज को ध्यान रखो, जब आप डिस्कशन लिखो तब भी इस मैसेज को ध्यान रखो. And when you write the conclusions, also you should be remembering this one particular message, because you're weaving your entire paper around this message. So the first thing to do after you have completed your thesis is to probably sit down and write that one message on a piece of paper. And if you're not able to write that one message, talk to your supervisor, talk to your guide, and come to a consensus between the two of you that what is that one message that you want to convey through this paper. अगर बहुत सारे messages हो जाते हैं एक साथ, then you will not be able to weave a paper around them. But if you have one single message, then trust me, you will have a good consolidated paper which you can build around this one single message. This one single message is the one part of the manuscript that you can repeat and you should repeat in every section of your paper. Baki part of messages you don't repeat. Baki cheezein you don't repeat anywhere in the paper, but this is the only message which you should be repeating again and again in the paper so that you hammer it home to anyone who has read your paper and they can remember this message that you wanted to convey. So if you finished your thesis, you obviously should know your conclusions by now. The structure of the conclusions in the manuscript follows a general specific pattern. Obviously, there are no thumb rules and there are no hard and fast rules. But the first sentence of your conclusion is a summary of your results, whatever you found in one sentence. Whatever key results you found, you put them up in one sentence. In the second sentence, you write the interpretation of your key results and extrapolation. So if you did them on a particular population in your hospital, how do these results extrapolate to other similar populations outside your study population? That's how the second sentence goes. And the third sentence is the inference and the impact of your results. कि अगर ये results सही हैं या ये results हैं, इसलिए this will be the gross larger impact on the individuals, on the community that you have been studying. So that in largely or in a nutshell is the essence of how you write the conclusions in your paper. You can and you should revisit the conclusions after you have completed your manuscript. So you do write the conclusions in the beginning, that one message you write it in the beginning, but after you have written your entire paper, you go back to the conclusions and look at them again and check if you have put everything in order. After you have done your conclusions, it's a good time to do your methods. Why I suggest that you do the methods in the beginning is because methods तो आप already thesis के लिए लिख चुके हो, and there is largely no difference between the thesis methods and the manuscript methods, except probably the number of words. So because the number of words in the thesis may be too elaborate, but in the paper you should try and limit your methods to about 500 to 700 words and try to summarize whatever methods you have used. The key to writing methods is that the other person who is reading it, if he wants to do a similar study, then he should have enough information to be able to repeat it. The components of a good method section are usually the study design, the duration, period, and setting of the study. आपने कब की थी research, कहाँ पर की थी, और कौन से अस्पताल में की थी, कौन से शहर में की थी. What is the sample size? How much was the sample size? How did you calculate it? What was the sampling strategy? What was the study population? आपके inclusion or exclusion criteria क्या थे? What was the intervention and what was the approach that you tried or put into your patients or participants? How did you plan or how did you do your statistical analysis? And what were the ethical considerations? So largely ethical considerations are limited to 2 or 3 sentences in which you always write that you took permission or you took clearance from your ethics committee in your institution, and you gave informed consent, or you took informed consent from the participants and included them only if they gave you an informed consent. It is always a good idea to include a pictorial representation of a graph like this, that what was the number of screened, how many you found eligible. But Latika will also discuss this more in the results section of the thesis. So I'll not go much into that kind of a graph. But a good method section, the key idea, as I said, is repeatability. Anybody who reads that study should be able to replicate that study and should have enough details into it. The key components are the type of patients you have studied, how did you define the condition which was your inclusion criteria, what was the setting of the research, what were the specific details of assessments that you conducted on your patients. A question that we often get asked is, can you use references in your methods? So usually, largely no, but then yes, there is an exception. And if you are quoting from a previously published rating or a method which has been published by another author elsewhere, then you can definitely quote them and cite them into your paper. Let's go ahead, and Latika would take over the observations and results section.
So before we set out to compile the results, the first step is to organize all the data you have and to sequence it. And first you need to divide it into the appropriate sections, which we'll come to in a minute. And how do we list these findings? Usually it's the chronologic process of the study. Like if you first recruited patients, you had some exclusions, and then you follow them up over a certain period of time. So that is the sequence that you're going to follow. But sometimes it is also the most logical way of presenting findings, which may not be the chronologic manner. For example, if you have a survey-based study and you have 10 questions, some are very general and some are more specific or carry greater clinical weightage, then you might want to list them first, and because that will interest your readers the most. So typically all papers first define the population characteristics at baseline, because the reader needs to understand what is the population you studied. Following that, whatever your study is based on, an observation or intervention, so if you administered a drug or you observed them, then that has to be listed, and the primary objective, whatever you had primarily set out to study, followed by the secondary objectives, which can be many in number, and usually it's a subgroup analysis or adverse drug events, and so on and so forth. So basically, you need to provide an overview of the changing patient disposition during the different stages of your study. So table 1 is part of almost every manuscript and would have been part of your thesis as well. And like all other tables, they have some, table 1 has some must-haves, like there should be a table number, a caption. So table headings typically come above the table, while figures are read below upward, so the legends go below the figures. Then, of course, there need to be column headings and then row headers like this. And you need to specify units of measurement. You usually have the patient number, and in bracket you can have the percentage for these, or you can have the range and interquartile range. Whatever you are mentioning has to be in brackets, followed by footnotes, where any additional information which you missed out goes here. Also, abbreviations need to be listed below each table, so they are standalone entities and can be interpreted with clarity even without the text of the manuscript. The title needs to be clear and non-ambiguous, and if the table is bulky, you need to prune it and chop off all the unnecessary information which may not be relevant to the study in case the study was not well defined. And also, if it is too narrow or too small a table, then you might want to convert it to text. So if you look at this table carefully, this is one of the first tables I drew as part of my DM thesis. And now when I had a look at it yesterday, I found so many errors. There's no footnote, there is no expansion of the abbreviations, and yes, in brackets, we haven't listed the percentages, although we can allow that because the number was nearly 100. So table needs to be designed carefully, and table 2 and 3, a lot of manuscripts will have table 2 and 3 or other tables which will be carried from your thesis, and usually these are the subgroup comparisons, which is a lot of data, and you would not have been able to list it into the text. Or even if you did, maybe it's time to now convert it into a table when you're writing the paper. But you always remember there should be no repetition between a text and a table. Suppose you have more data left even after table 1, 2, or 3, then you still have the online supplement where most of the readers, 99.9% almost, will be ignoring them, which is actually good because that data is not relevant to most people. But if someone is particularly interested in your study, then they have access to that data. And that's where you put it. So usually the primary analysis is the core of your study, and usually the conclusion is based on that. So you wouldn't want that being listed there. But the secondary analysis or any additional data might go into the supplement. Again, there should be no repetition. Negative results should not be hidden, and any kind of falsification of data amounts to serious academic misconduct. There would also be figures in your thesis usually, and these are typically used to display data which has a large amount of information. So since figures take a lot of space, we try not to use them to show simple data. And these are best for depicting changes over a period of time. As you can see here in the figure, it shows systolic blood pressure measurements after standard treatment and intensive treatment. And so figures need to be drawn prior, and sometimes you need to redraw. It's a skill which you might like to acquire and which comes with practice. And try to use least non-data ink. Legends need to be precise and standalone. And in case of case studies, which I don't expect your thesis to be, but just in case you have some particular instances which you like to depict there, then patient images or any patient information should have the identifiers removed and need to have appropriate permissions obtained, which I suppose we would have for the thesis, but just in case. Also, unlike your thesis, there would not be more than 1 or 2 figures. Sometimes you can club figures into a single large figure having various components like A, B, C, and D, and then you list the legends together. There is usually an article processing charge for some journals, so you might like to know that color figures may be chargeable, something you might need to watch out for during submission. So choosing the right graph can be tricky, but also very important. Line graph we just saw in the previous slide. A bar diagram usually compares categories of data, like particular types of disease, and we want to see the incidence of uveitis or any particular clinical feature in different kinds of arthritis. Then we draw a bar diagram. We can also draw a stacked bar chart. For example, this shows various kinds of muscle disorder, and it shows how many patients were alive and how many dead and how many were reclassified at the end of 1 year. And as you can see, the CAM stands for cancer-associated myositis. So you clearly see the orange bar is really long. So death was common in this group, but if the total number is just 3, so if we were to draw a classic bar graph, we would not get an idea about the ratios. So a stacked bar is to depict proportions. Then histogram is used for continuous data, as seen here, like height or weight or anything in which the confidence intervals overlap. Scatter diagram is another kind of graph which is used when there are two different variables and we want to assess their relationship with each other in different observations. So like this is a particular scoring system to measure the disease activity in arthritis, and this is another scoring system. So we want to see how they perform with respect to one another. So here we use a scatter diagram. Workflow chart, as Dr. Goel just told you, the essence of having this is to know at a glance what exactly you did with your sample, and if someone were to set out, they should be able to replicate your study. This adds weight to your study, makes the findings more valid, and any reviewer would want to accept your paper only if your methods are valid. And the early section of the results, the workflow chart can feature in either of the sections. And it is very important to point out here, if the methods are not valid, no reviewer would go beyond that to read your paper. It will be rejected then and there. So usually a population would be assessed for eligibility and there'll be some exclusions which need to be listed. What are the criteria for exclusion? If some patients had declined to participate, it is ideal to record that. And if there were any other reasons why they were left out. Following this, patients, if they were randomized to intervention groups, that needs to be specified, and how many followed up and how many were analyzed. This is typically for a randomized control trial or an observational or an open label study, but there are similar workflow charts for different kind of studies, which will come to the end of this webinar. It is important to emphasize once more that there should be no interpretation in the results. Although you can sometimes use some adverbial intensifiers like essentially and other adverbial intensifiers, but references typically don't feature here. And if you feel like adding a reference, maybe you have started discussing the findings and it might be important to have a look again and redraft the methods, the results.
Yep, so before we go on to the introduction, let me add and emphasize on two aspects of tables and figures that Dr. Latika also mentioned in her presentation. That table 1 is standard. आप जो भी आर्टिकल लिखेंगे वो टेबल 1 वैसे ही बनता है जैसे टेबल 1 को बनना चाहिए. Usually it is a standard format of 4 columns. If you have done a case control study, you've got the variables in your leftmost column, followed by the cases, the controls, and the total population in 4 different columns. Values in 3 columns में और variables के नाम पहले column में. And then those which are significantly different between the cases and controls, you put them highlighted by a star. This is how it goes for your cohort studies, for your case control studies, for your randomized controls trials. जब आप RCTs करते हैं या intervention studies करते हैं, the basic feature in table 1 that you want to show is at the baseline, your population was comparable. When you do a case control study, there also you were trying to show that at baseline, the cases and controls were similar. If you're doing a cohort study in which you have a longitudinal follow-up and you have one important variable of outcome interest, then you want to show what was the distribution of the independent variables or the parameters that you have studied at the baseline. So that is the standard format of table 1. और table 1 जो लोग थोड़ा बहुत statistically oriented हैं, there are specific programs which are available online जिसमें एक command के साथ आपका table 1 as it is बनकर निकल आता है, and it hardly takes about 10 seconds to make a table 1. So if you are a little statistically oriented, you've done your statistics yourself, get those plugins, get those patches, and get the table 1 out of your window immediately without much hassle or stress. Figures, when we do a thesis, we really go overboard in making so many figures, pie charts, bar graphs, diagrams, images. But for a paper, We generally do not do more than 2 or 1 figure. It's not recommended, and you really don't add a figure unless it really adds something to your paper. Similarly, table 1 is mandatory for most of the papers, but table 2 and table 3 are usually more specific and are dependent on the kind of paper that you are writing. So let's move on to the introduction. So why is it important to study this question? That's the basic crux of introduction. So introduction में आप अपने audience को, readers को केवल ये बताना चाहते हो कि ये study important क्यों थी, ये study हमने क्यों करी और आपको क्यों पढ़नी जरूरी है. If you build that interest into them, rest assured that they will read the rest of your paper. In the introduction, what you read is basically 4 different parts. So you have 4 clear paragraphs in your introduction. You put in a problem statement. In the problem statement, you write what is the size of the problem and what is the impact of the problem. 2 things in a problem statement. What is the size of the problem? What is the impact of the problem? अगर आपने पेपर किया है कि आप हाइड्रोक्सी क्लोरोक्वीन को स्टडी कर रहे हो इन अ पेशेंट ऑफ कोविड, so your problem statement should state what is the size of the problem of COVID, उसका क्या incidence है, क्या occurrence है, how quickly it is spreading, and what is the impact of COVID. COVID के आने से what disruption in life it has caused. That would be a good problem statement for that kind of a paper. The second paragraph of your introduction always talks about what is already known, what are the gaps, what is not known. In the third paragraph, you discuss what is your hypothesis. And in the last paragraph of your introduction, you always write the objectives and the aims of your current study. In the last paragraph of your introduction, you write what your study aims to do. So as I said, a problem statement talks about the size of the problem and the impact of the problem. And the last paragraph, I again emphasize, will discuss what this study aims to do. And it's important that you link this last part of your introduction to your discussion ka first paragraph. So I hope introduction is put aside. Just 4 clear paragraphs. ये सब आप अपनी thesis में already लिख चुके हो. So the idea is you should know what you need to extract from the introduction and ROL of your thesis and put into the introduction of your research paper. If you get this trick, you can do this probably within 30 minutes. You would know which areas of your thesis need to come into the introduction of the paper. 4 clear paragraphs, 1 problem statement, 2 what is already known, 3 what is your hypothesis, and 4 what your study aims to do now. Then coming on to discussion. So in the first paragraph, you summarize your results. Again, I'm saying you link the first paragraph to the last paragraph of your introduction. जो सवाल आपने introduction के last paragraph में पूछे हैं, उनका जवाब discussion के पहले paragraph में आ जाना चाहिए. That's why it is always easier to write them as a group. When we did methods, we did results, then we did introduction, and then we did discussion. So if you are writing in discussion immediately after you've written introduction, then you know that what were the questions that you raised in the last paragraph of introduction, so that you can put it into the discussion and the first paragraph. So again, you remember what was the last part of your introduction? Answer to those aims and don't introduce any new findings in discussion. So जो findings आपने results में नहीं बताई हैं, discussion में you will not take up those findings. You do not introduce any new findings in your discussion. So that's the first paragraph. In the second, third, and fourth paragraph, or fifth paragraph, however many you want, the large portion of your discussion is devoted to comparing your study with what the other researchers have found. That's the essence of the discussion. To show कि पहले ये पता था, पर अब हमने ये ढूंढा है और हमारी पहले वाले लोगों से अलग जानकारी किस लिए है. That is exactly what you want to show them in the next 2 or 3 paragraphs of discussion. We will take it up in the next slide further, But the last or the subsequent portion of the discussion is talking about the strengths and limitations of your study, why your study should be published or why it should not be published is the kind of things that you take up. What are the weaknesses of your study? What are the strengths of your study? And the last part of discussion is basically the suggestions for future research, in which you guide the readers that agar koi is subject par iske aage shodh karna chahta hai, या if you want to do any research beyond this, then what are the things that you could try and study so that there is advancement of literature in this area and in this field. Let's talk a little bit more about paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. So I would suggest that each paragraph is devoted to one study or one result area. You can choose that. So if you have 2 or 3 studies which are quite similar to what work you are doing or have done, then you should devote one paragraph to each of those studies. And her paragraph ka structure remains largely similar, in which the first sentence summarizes the cited study. How do you summarize the cited study? You have the these few questions that you should be answering in the first 1 or 2 sentences of each paragraph. Who did that study? When did they do that study? Where was this study done? On whom was this study done? Means what is the study population? How many were included in their study? What was the intervention that was done? What did they find? What was the outcome? What was the study design? And each of these sentences in the beginning of the paragraph should be followed by a citation. So if I'm trying to summarize in one sentence, I could give you an example and say that Gupta et al. In 2020 in Lucknow studied on a population of 200 COVID patients, and they gave them hydroxychloroquine and found that those who received hydroxychloroquine had half the chances of developing COVID positivity as compared to those who did not receive hydroxychloroquine. So that in one sentence would be a summarization of the study in completeness, and it would be followed by a citation. The second sentence of each paragraph follows and compares the results of your study with the other studies that have been done. The one that you have quoted in the first sentence, you try and compare your result with the other person's result. कि हमारा उनसे कम है या ज़्यादा है या same है. And third sentence, may you discuss if there was a difference, then why was the difference? Or if the results were similar, then why do you think they were similar? That is the crux of your discussion. And again, when you have done your review of literature and when you have written the discussion of the thesis, this is like cakewalk for you. And there is really nothing much that you need to do this except draw whichever paragraphs you think are suitable for this particular question of your paper into the discussion of that paper. This again should not take you more than 15, 20, 30 minutes if you have really written your thesis yourself. The strengths and limitation of the study. Obviously, you need to sell your study. आपको अपना product बेचना है. Here you are the salesman. You tell them why your study is unique, what's new in your study. This is the first time anyone has studied hydroxychloroquine. इससे पहले पूरी दुनिया में किसी ने देखा ही नहीं है. What went wrong? When you're writing the limitations, you need to tell them what went wrong, why the results may not have been as you expected them to be, how could you have made them better, and what would you want to do differently if you were doing the study again. So those are the kind of things which will get your limitations going, and that's how you will finish your discussion on strengths, limitations, and follow it up with future studies. After you have done this, you would come up to the abstract. But before we go on to the abstract, I see that there is a question which is being raised.
So my question is it okay to cite your systematic review if the research question is similar to what you to your thesis?
Yeah, so Monica is asking, can you quote or cite from a systematic review if your research question is similar? Definitely, you should be quoting a systematic review if it exists in literature. if the question is same as that you are trying to answer, and if there is already available a systematic review of literature, then there is no way that you should miss it. It should come into your paper, but the right place to quote this systematic review would be in your introduction, and that will tell that kya, because if you remember, we said introduction discusses what has already been studied and published. So a systematic review is the top level of evidence. Like meta-analysis and systematic review would be the best evidence that is available. And if you want to cite your systematic review, the best place for you to cite this systematic review would be in the second paragraph of your introduction, where you are telling people what is already known about this subject. I hope that answers your question. And with this, I will also launch another poll, which is coming on your screen now. Which part do you think is the most read section of your paper? And there are 4 choices which are available on your screen. Is it the methods? Is it your conclusions? Is it the results? Or is it the abstract? So which do you think is the most read part of your paper? So I'll close the poll now and share the results with you. So like most of you have said, yes, it's the abstract of the paper. So whenever you send a paper for publication, it's your abstract which is most likely to get read. Definitely results and conclusions are important, but abstract padhne ke baad, most of the editors will decide whether they are going to publish this paper or they are not going to publish this paper. So your abstract is the most important and the most read 250 words of your paper. Let me also launch another poll for you. Which line in your paper, which line in your paper is the most read line of your paper? So do you think it's the first line of introduction? Do you think it's the last line of conclusions? Do you think it's the first line of the results? Or do you think it's the title? Which? And here are the results on your screen. So like some of you feel that the last line of conclusions and the first line of results are the ones that are most read, but rest assured, it's only the title of your paper. Agar title mein interest nahi aaya logon ko, so they will not read any other line of your paper. And title is one part of your paper jo to sab padhenge hi na. Before they go on to read your paper, they will definitely be pulled to your paper by the title. So why did I put those 2 polls, the abstract and the title, was just to emphasize on you that these are the 2 most important sections of your paper, which will determine कि आपका paper क्या publish होगा या रद्दी की टोकरी में जाएगा. So is it going to the trash basket or is it going for publication is dependent on how you have written your title and how you have written your abstract. The trick in this is that most of the journals, जब आप submit करते हो paper, it will go to the editor's desk. Your editor does not have time to read the entire paper. He will only read your title. If he's interested in your title, he will then read your abstract. If he gets enough interest by reading your abstract, he will not read the paper. He will send it out for a peer review. Now, he will send it out to 2, 3, 4, or 5 reviewers to review your paper. Apna kam dusre ke upar dalna. That's the usual story. That's what everyone does. So they will send it out to the peer reviewers to read your paper. But by the time he has read the abstract, he's either already made up his mind that your paper is good enough to get a publication. And when any journal has done so much exercise कि उन्होंने 4 लोगों को आपका पेपर भेजा है और उनसे पढ़वा के उसके कमेंट्स बुलाए हैं, so in most likelihood you have already crossed the first hurdle, and the reviewer comments are usually not to reject but to accept the paper agar thoda bahut theek thak likha hai with corrections. So it is rare that you will ever get a response ki your paper is accepted without any changes. You will always get a list of changes and reviewer comments that you need to make. But जो आपके पेपर का भाग्य और निर्णय तय हुआ वो आपका abstract पढ़ने के बाद हो गया था. So your abstract is definitely the most important or the most read 250 words of your paper. So you need to spend some time per word. Each abstract is also structured in the form of IMRD. IMRD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. So the same structure that your paper has, again, you have the same structure in your abstract. 2 lines of introduction, 2 lines of methods, 2 lines of results, and 2 lines of discussion, and your abstract is done. But you need to choose very carefully and very wisely what are these 2 lines going to be. And largely, they will be the same as we have discussed in the length of your paper. So जो paper के substance में आने वाला है, वही abstract में will present a summary of everything in the same structure. So अगर हमने paper के लिए कहा था कि introduction में we are going to start with the problem statement, and we are then going to write what is known, what is not known, and what are the aims and objectives. So while writing the abstract also, it is the same structure. You are going to write the problem statement, you're going to write what is known, and you are going to write your aims and objectives. After this, let's take up title. Latika.
So the title needs to cover your research question in depth. It should capture the essence of your study. So did you study, whom did you study, what exactly did you study, and what was the outcome of the study? And if it was a novel study, then it's good to add the word novel, like novel findings in a cohort study of so and so, because that will pull the reader towards reading your entire manuscript. And the relevance of the manuscript, again, if the findings are a game changer in management of some disease or in general with respect to science, then that needs to be captured in the title, because only then the person will feel like reading your entire manuscript. Apart from that, we have limited amount of words in title, ideal title length being around 10 to 12 words, although it could be lesser or more depending on the situation. But it needs to be short, crisp, and accurate. So precision and brevity they don't come easy. You need to practice and maybe have your senior members of the team review your title, because it is the most read line of your paper. And then we come to the MESH terms. So MESH is basically medical subject headings. So this is the term used for search terms. So any kind of database that has records or maintains a record of all the manuscripts, they will have various key terms which will identify characteristics of particular paper. So on Medline or PubMed, which is the most commonly used database in medicine, MESH is the term used for these keywords. So you would ideally want your title to carry those keywords, because whatever the study represents should be found wherever an person interested in a particular topic searches for those manuscripts on PubMed. So suppose you're dealing with antihypertensives of 2 different kinds and yours is an RCT, then you want to add the word RCT, you want to add antihypertensives, all that should be there in your title, because those will be MESH terms, and you need to look up the exact MESH keywords for the searches. Apart from that, the type of study, it's very important, as you would be familiar with the various levels of evidence. A case series is a very poor form of evidence, or a survey, and if you come after that, then is a cohort or a case control study, and right at the top would be systematic reviews. Before that would be RCT. So depending on what kind of study you did, the viewer will be more interested in reading, because the findings will be more carry more weight. Apart from that, a common question which my students often ask me is, can we put a catchy title? So it is common as young people in our career. I have myself wanted to do that at times, but in original articles, as your thesis, it will usually be original work. It is important that the title carries all these questions, the answers to all these important things, and catchy titles are typically limited to editorials or opinion pieces. And the other question, which we even had yesterday, is whether the title can give away the results of your study. So it totally depends on how much you think it's worth keeping the suspicion. If your study seems very general, like sometimes thesis can be titled differently, like comparison of two antihypertensives in group A and B. But then now you have the results of the study. And by the time you've completed your study, maybe a year or two have gone by, and there's more evidence. Suppose there's two antihypertensives, and now there is real evidence coming up that previously people thought drug B was better, but now they think that drug A is better. And there's an ongoing controversy, and at the same time you are thinking of publishing a thesis which maybe challenges that notion. So you would want to give away some of those results in the title, because people will really be interested that, oh, they found that drug A was better than drug B. So that's when you give away. It is okay, because still they will want to know why and how this happened, and they will go on to read your entire manuscript. So keywords, we've already pretty much talked about them, and apart from the title, you also need to list keywords, usually below the abstract for most of the submission systems. And the keywords again need to be mesh terms, well researched, so the paper is searchable and found by relevant readers in the times to come. This is important because papers are typically carry value if they are cited more often. That means that your research was more meaningful and contributed to science. So that will be possible only if it is found by the appropriate reader, where keywords become extremely important. Once you are done with your study, you would come to the question of authorship. And this slide is just to give you an overview that authorship criteria have evolved with time, and there are various criteria out there for you to check out. But what you need to familiarize yourself with is inappropriate authorship, which you should try to never engage in. So one is the concept of gifted authorship, where an author who has not contributed becomes part of the author list. This is usually done with a senior author whom you want to please, like the head of the department or someone in a senior position, either to enter their good books or to expect some sort of favor in return. The other thing is a guest authorship, where someone is, suppose, a person, an influential person, and your study is not really that great, but you think that if they are added to the author list, it will add more weight to your paper. This is these are serious forms of academic misconduct, and ideally one should not engage in these. Apart from that, sometimes you see what is known as ghost authorship, where a person who had been part of the author's list throughout and had contributed significantly fails to be part of the study when it is published. So just to define contributor roles, which is a question that comes up often, various systems have evolved, and the CRT is one of the credit taxonomy systems, which delineates 14 contributor roles. And you might want to see here that data collection may not figure here, but data curation and any form of intellectual contribution to the manuscript, like analysis or validation, writing the original draft, these are significant contributor roles, and these need to be acknowledged in the manuscript. Most of the systems where you submit your paper, they will also ask you to list the exact contribution of each of the authors. And then the sequence is again something very important. First, the first author is usually the person who's done most of the study and drafted the results and prepared the first draft and revised it critically for intellectual content. Apart from that, second author is usually the person who's contributed the next, has had the next major contribution. And last one is usually the most senior member of the team, or it can be the corresponding author. So all said and done, it is extremely sad and but also true that inappropriate authorship is a serious problem, widely prevalent, and it has been reported to be the highest in Asia, more so in China and also in India. So this is something you might need to deal with, but this is how ideally it should be done.
There are some traps that you need to look at and be careful about. And definitely, we are not going to teach you about these traps and go into the details of them. You all know what is plagiarism, and careers have been ruined after 10 years of publication. हो सकता है आप आज प्लेगियराइज करके या फॉल्सिफाई करके या फैब्रिकेट डेटा करके पेपर छाप लो, but then these things have a tendency to haunt you when you least expect them to. You might be situated at a very critical stage in your career, and there might be somebody who would want to bring up a nasty situation for you and might bring out a complaint at that particular time, which will create an embarrassing situation for you at a much later date. So please avoid these traps right now in your career. The plagiarism, fabrication, or falsification of data are not what you want to get into right at this time. Please do remember that there are predatory and hijacked journals, which will tell you that if you give an X amount of money, they can publish your paper very quickly. But definitely, again, this is not the kind of trap you want to enter into in the beginning of your careers when you are trying to publish your first thesis. At this point of time, there are several plagiarism softwares that are available. Some are available free, some are paid softwares. You have a list here on your screen, the free softwares which are available, the paid ones which are available. But a usual question that we often get asked is, what is the exact cutoff? Kitna acceptable hai aur kitna acceptable nahi hai? So friends, 0% is best. You should avoid plagiarism completely. And if you have to write, you write in your own words. However, if you want the cutoffs, then this is from a site of a journal, which I'm going to give you the figures. They would accept anything below 15%. They say that if they get something between 16 to 30%, they would invite you to revise. If the plagiarism report says 31 to 50%, they would tend to reject your paper. And if they find that plagiarism report is more than 50%, they would not only reject your paper, but also ask you for an explanation. So this again is indicative from one particular journal, and every journal has their own standards and their own funders, and which they don't even advertise. But this is just an indicative guide for those who are fixated on cutoffs and percentages. So you could use this in your plagiarism reports to draft and design your paper. With this, we have mostly come to the end of this. And but what do we do about references? So let me tell you, friends, you are living in 2020. And if you are still writing your references manually and by hand, then probably you should not be writing papers. There are several reference management software available, free and paid. There is EndNote, there is RefMan, there is Zotero, there is Mendeley. If you've not heard any one of these terms, you are probably living 20 years in the past or more. And if you are seriously thinking about writing your paper, you should be familiarizing yourself with these names much more. And you should be looking for a reference management software which will handle your references easily. Not going to talk more about references beyond this. There are some resources which I would like to bring to your attention and which you should know. There is one paper which is entitled Hints on Writing for Publication, published in 2007 in the African Journal of Tradition by Liz Wager. Liz is short for Elizabeth, but she writes Liz. Liz Wager, Hints on Writing for Publication. Beautiful article, which will tell you exactly what you need to write in introduction, what you need to write in abstract, what you need to write in discussion. Use it. If you want more, there is this book by Liz Wager, which talks about getting research published. And there is one web resource or one page, which I'm going to show you in one of the next slides, which is called the Equator Network. Please remember this. Also, there are some reporting guidelines which have been standardized and which have been promoted. And you should be familiar with these reporting guidelines if you are planning to write your paper. If you are writing an observational study, you should know about Strobe. If you're writing a randomized trial, you should be familiar with consort statement. If you're writing a systematic review, you should know about Prisma. And if you are writing a case report, then you should be knowing about care guidelines. Where do you find them? The place to find them at one place is the Equator Network. This is the one-stop shop for everything related to publication, and you will find all these guidelines here at one place. You should Google Equator Network and get across to Equator Network and see where you want to be. With this, we come to an end of our webinar today.